thank you very much, John, and my dear colleagues. These guys are my true friends, not only from Nuremberg, from all the years since, and I really love them. They are dedicated men. They really believe in the rule of law, and I'm honored to be gathered here, to be here in their company. Now, during World War II, leaders of the Axis powers were repeatedly warned against the commission of acts of cruelty and barbarism. On December 17, 1942, the Allies took note of pogroms against the Jews and condemned in the strongest possible terms this bestial policy of cold-blooded extermination, reaffirming their solemn resolution to ensure that those responsible for these crimes shall not escape a retribution. The crimes having continued so far as could be ascertained from behind the battle lines, on March 24, 1944, President Franklin Roosevelt declared, "In one of the blackest crimes of all history, begun by the Nazis in the days of peace, and multiplied by them 100 times in time of war, the wholesale systematic murder of the Jews of Europe goes on unabated every hour. It is therefore fitting that we should again proclaim our determination that none who participate in these acts of savagery shall go unpunished." At the close of the war in Europe, the major victorious powers, the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, agreed to bring to trial the leaders of the Axis powers responsible for initiating World War II and the commission of competent crimes. By the London Agreement of August 8, 1945, the International Military Tribunal was established with jurisdiction over crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, namely the extermination or other inhumane treatment of civilian populations in connection with other crimes within the jurisdiction of the tribunal. Following the adoption of the charter of the tribunal, an indictment was prepared charging 24 leaders of Nazi Germany with the commission of crimes within the tribunal's jurisdiction. The comprehensive judgment of the tribunal made no explicit mention of genocide, confining its description of murder and ill treatment of civilian populations to the language of the Charter. Genocide as such was not declared to be a crime in international law by the IMT, but genocide as a legal principle was affirmed by the General Assembly of the United Nations in its resolution of December 8, 1945, when it defined genocide as the denial of the right of existence of entire human groups, as homicide is the denial of the right to live of individual human beings. Genocide today is a recognized and affirmed crime in international law through both the Genocide Convention and the Statute of the International Criminal Court. Its recognition is a result, in principal part, of the evidence we assembled at Nuremberg. The subject was covered at length in my book, Tyranny on Trial, but I have more recently written a volume on the incredible genocide by the Nazis at Auschwitz, entitled Murder by the Millions, which is published by the Jackson Center, and it was this Nazi Holocaust which assured the universal recognition of genocide as a crime in international law. Now, in the Nazi system, the principal repressive agencies, the Gestapo and the SD, had been combined with the Nazi intelligence system within the Reich Main Security Office, or RSHA. Justice Jackson's Executive Trial Counsel, Colonel Robert G. Story, directed me to prepare the case against the Gestapo and SD and the chief of the Reich Main Security Office, Ernst Kaltenbrunner. I was provided an office in the frigid Palace of Justice, a German secretary, a second-hand typewriter, and told to find the evidence, write the briefs, and assemble the proofs for this aspect of the case. Shortly after I had been given this assignment, I found an interesting letter in our document room. It had been written by a man named Becker to Walter Rauff, the head of the Motor Vehicles Department of the Gestapo. In his letter, Becker complained about the malfunctioning of a gas van he was operating in the Eastern Territories. It was written from an Einsatz commando. At that time, I knew nothing about Einsatz commandos or criminal activities of the Gestapo and SD on the Eastern Front. While working on the Kaltenbrunner case, I learned that British intelligence had taken prisoner a man by the name of Otto Ohlendorf and had him under interrogation in London. Ohlendorf was the head of Amt 3 of the RSHA, which dealt with matters of intelligence within Germany. I had no idea that he might be able to shed light on war crimes, but I thought it would be useful to bring him to Nuremberg, where I could learn more from him about the organization of which Kaltenbrunner, my defendant, was the chief. The British sent him to Nuremberg, and I began the interrogation by asking him what his activities had been during the war. He said that he had served as chief of Amt 3 of the RSHA, except for the year of 1941. Naturally, I asked what he had done during that year. When he replied that in 1941 he had been in command of Einsatzgruppe D, I immediately recalled the Becker letter, which had been written from an Einsatz commando, and was inspired to ask, "Well, Ohlendorf, how many men, women, and children did your group kill during that year?" And he answered, 90,000. That broke the case on the extermination program of the Einsatzgruppen in the Eastern Territories. And we were able to establish, through the testimony of Ohlendorf and others, that approximately 2 million persons, namely Jews, had been murdered by these units of the RSHA. It was the initial proof of the Holocaust, genocide by Germany. Ohlendorf testified before the IMT that he knew of Becker and Rauff, and that the Becker letter was genuine. The Soviet member of the tribunal, General Nikochenko, asked the following questions of Ohlendorf. Question: in your testimony, you said that the Einsatz groups had the object of annihilating the Jews and commissars. Is that correct? Answer: yes. Question: and in what category did you consider the children? For what reason were the children exterminated? Answer: the order was that the Jewish population should be totally exterminated. Question: including children? Answer: yes. In my book, Tyranny on Trial, a diagram is displayed containing a report by Stahlecker, the chief of Einsatz Group A, showing the number of Jews exterminated in the Baltic states, each number encased in the diagram of a coffin. The report stated that in the first 4 months of operations, Einsatz Group A had murdered 135,000 communists and Jews. Estonia was shown as already judenfrei, free of Jews. By the time we had rested our case, we had not found the greatest killer of the regime, Rudolf Hirsch, the commandant of Auschwitz concentration camp. It was therefore a dramatic moment when I was informed that Hirsch had been captured by the British near Flensburg. I asked that he be sent to Nuremberg, where I interrogated him over a period of 3 days, reducing his testimony to an affidavit. Hirsch told me and later testified to the tribunal in open court that approximately 2.5 million persons had been murdered at Auschwitz. Upon completion of his testimony, he was turned over to the Polish government. While awaiting trial in Poland, Hirsch recanted his confession in part, stating that the figure he had given me had been supplied by Gestapo Chief Eichmann, and that he regarded the total of 2.5 million as far too high. Even Auschwitz had limits to its destructive possibilities, he wrote. Perhaps the figure was inflated. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial estimates that slightly over 1 million Jews, 1 million Jews, were killed at Auschwitz. In addition, gypsies, Soviet POWs, Jehovah's Witnesses, and others were consumed in the inferno. There may have been a macabre twist to Hirsch's testimony, since he was to be labeled the world's supreme murderer. In any case, he may have thought in his morbid mind to establish a record of mass killings never to be surpassed by any other man. This seems a reasonable supposition when it is remembered that Eichmann had said that he would jump laughing into his grave, remembering the killing of 6 million Jews of Europe. Hitler and his Confederates who led Germany to disaster in the 20th century are all dead. They were the principal actors in a fearsome drama, but as Prospero foretold, they were all spirits and melted into air, into thin air. The tyrant Hitler and his associates in crime will someday be forgotten. Forgotten, too, may be their crimes. It is enough that tomorrow's world remembers what today's world has learned through the bitter experience of this fallen regime, that tyranny leads to inhumanity, and inhumanity to death. The spirit of Hitlerism was one of the greatest factors for evil in all of history. For Hitler had the advantage over tyrants of earlier times, of modern technology, through which his propaganda could be constantly pounded into the German people, and his war machine could be made to strike his enemies with shattering force. The consequence of that spirit was the commission of genocide and other crimes against humanity which stagger comprehension. After hearing the confession of Rudolf Hirsch to the Nuremberg tribunal, the defendant Hans Frank, the Governor General of occupied Poland, declared that was the low point of the entire trial. To hear a man say out of his own mouth that he exterminated 2.5 million people in cold blood, that is something people will talk about for 1,000 years. We must have an effective system of international justice crowning our national systems of law. Our scientists have not feared to make thermonuclear weapons which could destroy civilization. Certainly, we should not fear to establish the principles of law which will permit civilization to survive. We must find the way to make law supreme in international relations, or we shall live forever under a pall of fear. Nuremberg stands firmly against the resignation of man to the inhumanity of man. Because of Nuremberg and the efforts which it represents of men's attempt to elevate justice and law over inhumanity and war, there is a hope for a better tomorrow.